Hello and welcome to the fourth and final installment of Ancient Greece Notes. This is Coach Bowman, your pre AP World History teacher. Finally made it through. We are almost done with the first semester. Please make sure you have the correct notes. We're on part four, Ancient Greece. Today we're going to be looking into the Peloponnesian War and the group known as the Macedonians. Please make sure you have the correct notes because here we go. So, what exactly was the Peloponnesian War? Well, you got to look back to the Delian League. As we talked about in our last set, the Delian League was a defense alliance amongst the Greek city states led by Athens. Go back 2 units ago when we looked at Athens, we talked about how Athens was extremely academic. It was democratic. Not everybody thinks the same way as the people of Athens. Kind of a little bit of background there. Eventually, what happens, there are certain city states that break away from the Delian League, particularly Sparta. They create their own defense league known as the Peloponnesian League. Why Peloponnesian? Well, think back to our geography, the very first video about ancient Greece, when we talked about, you got it, the Peloponnesus Peninsula, where Sparta is located. That is the reason why it is known as the Peloponnesian League. All the city states that are on the Peloponnesian League broke away from the Delian League and joined and followed Sparta in their Peloponnesian League, this defense league of a stronger, more militaristic view opposed to the academic, democratic, diplomatic style of the Athenian League led by Athens. Again, very different ideas on how to protect Greece. Again, Athens, more democratic and diplomatic, would rather talk things out and discuss things, whereas Sparta, it would rather go to war and have a more fierce battle opposed to a debate. As you can see here, the breakdown of the two sides. So if you look at this map, this is something I always do with my students. Do you think the Athenian League or the Delian League would rather fight a naval battle or an army battle on land? Looking at this map, Athens being in orange, Sparta being in purple, you got it. Athens would rather be fighting on the water. They had a really strong navy. Sparta, and as we've talked about before, very militaristic. Sparta would rather fight on land. Eventually, what's going to happen is you're going to have Sparta conquering Athens. They actually lay siege to the city, meaning that they didn't allow anyone in or out, no supplies in or out, and basically choked Athens off from any type of resupplying. Eventually, Athens surrenders, buckling to Sparta, and this is going to be, in essence, the beginning of the end for Greece as a cultural beacon. Because what happens here is Sparta, with a strong military viewpoint, slows down the cultural development of Greece. And in turn, it also weakens the defense. Think about it. The Peloponnesian War was, in essence, a Greek civil war. It was Greek fighting Greek. Think about that one. So you're using Greek resources, you're using Greek weaponry, Greek finances, Greeks in person, soldiers killing other Greek soldiers. So your population is going to decrease. And in turn, weakens it, makes it vulnerable for invasion, especially when you have this itty bitty kingdom just sitting back, watching Greece fight amongst itself. And in comes in the Macedonians. Perfect timing. Great plan. It's one of the smartest moves in world history. So again, you let them fight each other, you stay back, and when they're both weak, you go in. That was the mindset of this guy, Philip II of Macedonia. I don't know if he was truly the creative idea behind the cartoon Popeye, but who knows? So, this is going to bring us to what is known as the Macedonian conquest. So, Macedonia, a little region north of Greece, was ruled by this guy, Philip II. Later on, we'll talk about Philip II of Spain, not related at all. So, keep that in mind. When we talk about Philip II, it usually would say of Macedonia or of Macedon. Okay, so keep that in mind. So, Philip II. Now, before the war, when Greece was flourishing and um, Athens was this academic icon, this huge area of um, cultural, what's the word I'm looking for, um, hotspot in the Mediterranean. Philip II decides that his son would benefit the most by traveling from Macedonia into Athens to be taught by some of the greatest teachers that the world at that time has known. So, at a young age, his son, Alexander, is taught by, as we found out the last slideshow, Aristotle. So, it is at this point when we start to see young Alexander becoming influenced by Greek culture. So, before or after, I should say, Alexander is educated. Alexander comes back home. The war happens, and Philip decides to invade Greece. So, again, this was something that the Persians tried for centuries to do, failed to do because, again, the Greeks were too strong as a whole. It kind of references you have a bunch of sticks, put them together, and it's kind of difficult to break the whole bundle of sticks. But if you have the sticks in smaller groupings, it's a lot easier to break. So, Philip II, right time to go in and invade. So, how does Alexander come to be so great, as his name states? Well, again, going back to a very young age, he falls in love with Greek culture. Learning all these things that Aristotle has taught him, reading the stories of the Iliad and Odyssey, which, according to legend, he had a copy with and he took with him everywhere he went. But again, after his father mysteriously died, Philip II, for some reason, um, some say it was an illness, some say it was assassinated, it was done on purpose. But Alexander takes over the Macedonian Empire, which at the time was only Macedonia and Greece. There wasn't anything else, just those two little areas there. So as Alexander came of age, he decides that the rest of the world should understand and thrive like the Greeks have. And so he decides to spread the Greek culture to the areas, and he becomes an invader like his father. He first travels to Asia Minor. Again, we talked about this a little bit before. Remember, Asia Minor is modern day Turkey. You also might see it as Anatolia. Then he travels south to Egypt. Now, according to legend, his reputation got to Egypt before he did. And so the Egyptians had been struggling so much with conflict and war that their economy was so weak that they were just willing for him to come in and help them. So there was not a battle, not a single drop of blood was shed, and boom, all of a sudden he becomes the next pharaoh of Egypt. Really, really smooth transition. He was himself very surprised, according to letters. He then travels northeast of Egypt, following the Fertile Crescent into Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Again, that's between the Tigris and Euphrates. So he conquers that. And all he's doing at this point in time is chipping away, chipping away, chipping away at what was the Persian Empire. Eventually, he does get to Persia. And in turn, when he gets to Persia, he decides to kind of flip the script on the Persians. Yeah, I will conquer you, but at the same time, allow you to keep your culture. But here's a little bit of Greek stuff. I want you to start learning some Greek. I want you to start doing some things that the Greeks would do. And then eventually, he tried to go into the Indus Valley. When he reached the Indus Valley, keep in mind, he's been going nonstop since he started this campaign. He did not allow his soldiers to go back and visit family and friends. They did not have the opportunity for some R and R, as they call it now. So the morale, by the time they got to the Indus Valley, Alexander's army had very low morale. There was a lot of rumbling going on amongst the ranks of mutiny, of just up and leaving in the middle of the night, and Alexander was quite upset with this. Now, after numerous battles, and the Indus Valley was his last. No, he didn't die there, but he was defeated in the Indus Valley, which was one of his first major defeats. So to kind of boost morale, they backtracked into Persia, and unfortunately for Alexander, this is where he dies. He dies of a fever, so they say. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Some say he was poisoned. So we will get to that reason in a little bit. So here is again the map of Alexander and his campaign. As you can see, he's going into Asia Minor, down into Egypt. All right, he goes into Mesopotamia and into Persia, goes into the Indus Valley, and goes back. Oh, look at that word right there. That used to be the capital called Persis. But when Alexander goes and takes over, he creates it into a Greek city as Persepolis. Polis. Look at there. There's another one. Alexandropolis. Oh, look at here. Look at this. Alexandria. 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 Yep, you see it. You see all of these? Especially this one over here in Egypt. That's extremely important. What's going to end up happening is anytime he is army camped, he creates a new town, a new city. Again, Alexandria. So it's really, really interesting how influential this young man became. When Alexander dies, remember we talked about how he supposedly died from a fever? Well, look what happens to his empire. His empire gets split into to be controlled by all of his generals. Very interesting. Could this perhaps have been a motive? We will never know now, will we? But again, it does make you wonder if that was a motivation enough to kill off Alexander the Great. So, what happens after this? Well, during this time, Greek culture, Hellenic culture, becomes mixed with others and is extremely influential. And to the point where you have places in Rome that talk about Alexander. This was a mosaic. We'll talk about what a mosaic is later, but in more detail, I should say. But a mosaic is a piece of artwork that has multiple tiles, that has multiple stones that come together to form a picture. This was a mosaic done in the city of Pompeii. If you are familiar with that city, you know what happened to it. If you aren't familiar with it, maybe you've ridden the ride at Busch Gardens, Escape from Pompeii. Again, fun ride, especially when it's nice and hot out. But the city is destroyed by a volcano known as Mount Vesuvius. They had an exhibit downtown Richmond here a few years ago. It was quite fascinating. But we can zoom in and we see Alexander here. And this style of artwork is known as a Byzantine style. We have very large eyes. And so he didn't have big bug eyes like this, but we definitely know that this was an image of Alexander the Great. So, as I was saying, when Alexander the Great comes and brings Greek culture with him, what is known as Hellenic culture, Greek culture is just Hellenic culture. He does something different, though. He creates what's known as Hellenistic. And here's the formula on how to make Hellenistic culture into the Hellenistic age. You are mixing Greek culture with other cultures. Okay, so if you look at the statue there on the left, this is a statue of Buddha. But if you look, it is a very Greek style. The physique of Buddha, you see the muscles and the tones of Buddha there. It almost looks like he has a Greek toga on. So this is a prime example of what Hellenistic art would look like. Now, eventually, this culture, this Hellenistic culture, would travel and spread greatly throughout his empire, thanks to what we called earlier on the Royal Road. Um, but again, trade has a huge influence on this. During the Hellenistic age, we have this huge transition from education in Athens to the education center of Alexandria in Egypt. This is where the famous lighthouse was built. Your diagram there on the right. But you also have a lot of other achievements that occurred during this time period, particularly in math and science. In the field of science, we will discuss a guy named Archimedes. Archimedes creates what's known as the water screw. He also creates the concept of a lever, or some people might call it a lever. All right, definitely a physical science. So you have another gentleman by the name of Hippocrates, not Hippocrates. But keep that in mind here in a second. I'll give you a little hint on why you need to know his name. But he is known as the father of medicine. And this is the time period where we start to see people truly start to question the Greek gods and goddesses. Before the Hellenistic age, people just accepted the gods and goddesses as a real entity. They accepted the myths as truths. And so it was during this Hellenistic age where you start to see people truly start to question these things. Um, for Hippocrates, again, in the field of medicine, he creates what's known as the Hippocratic Oath. If you become a nurse or a doctor, this is something that you say before or upon your graduation of med school. So again, Archimedes, there's your traditional sketch of a lever. As you can see, you have a weight here, and you have what's called a focal point, and you have your lever or lever. This board is a lever. He's applying pressure, pushing down on this to cause this to move. And the closer the focal point is to your mass, the more pressure it's going to be in order for you to move it. And then here's a pretty interesting diagram of a water screw. Now imagine this red ball as being water. What the water screw does is you have a cylinder, all right, with a screw style device inside. And as it turns, look what happens to the red ball, or in the case of a water screw, what would be happening to the water? It moves up the cylinder. So in ancient Greece, you go back to our very first video, part one, we talked about geography and how mountainous it was. This becomes a huge, huge benefit for agriculture to allow water to go from a low level to a higher level. Because, again, name of the device, a water screw. So Archimedes, once again, we thank you. And again, Hippocrates with medicine. In the field of math, this might be a little bit more familiar to some of you. You have Euclid, who is known as the father of geometry. He wrote a book called The Elements, which had over 300 formulas of geometry. 300 formulas. Can you imagine that? That hurts my head just thinking about it. Another mathematician is Pythagoras. Now, this guy you might know. You probably have heard of him before, and possibly his great theorem. He too was a leader in the geometry realm, and his a squared plus b squared equals c squared is still being taught in math classes throughout the world. So, once again, Pythagoras, Euclid, mathematics everywhere thanks you. So take a look at this. It's kind of interesting when we look at the different um, fields that the Greeks have influenced the Western world. Again, a lot of things people don't truly understand or didn't realize, I should say, how influential the Greeks truly were. So what happens? What happened to Greece? Well, as I showed you, with Alexander's generals taking over his empire, the next 300 years was nothing but conflict. Who controlled what areas, so on and so forth. And of course, this weakens his empire to the point where no one's really paying attention to what's happening on this peninsula in the middle of the Mediterranean, the Italian peninsula. There's a small little village that begins to grow, and it will eventually grow to be one of the mightiest empires that we know of as Rome. So, again, this is all we have for the first semester. I appreciate everything that you have done. Please make sure that you fill in everything in your notes. By the way, almost forgot. Secret bonus word is Rome, Rome. You send me an email with Rome as the secret word, and you will get 5 points on your Greece test. Again, the secret bonus word for your Greece test is Rome, Rome. Thank you. Be safe, and I'll see you next time.